welcome to this special digital event to celebrate the 2020 Manchester Writing Prizes. The competition, in case you don't know, is run by the Writing School at Manchester Metropolitan University, and it seeks to find the best new writing around the world in both fiction and in poetry, and to support and celebrate these writers. And I think it's particularly important for Manchester, which is a city of writers, and recently has become a UNESCO city of literature, that we lead the way in supporting our writers. So the rules of the competition, we award £10,000 each year to a poet and a prose writer. The poetry can be a portfolio of between 3 and 5 poems, and the short story can be up to 2,500 words. And we are going to be seeing and hearing from the shortlist this evening, and I'll pop up later to announce the winners. Our past winners have told us that the prize has been really important, crucial to their work, helping buy them time to write, attracting the interest of editors and agents, going on to be published. And our previous winners have included Mona Archie, Helen Mort, Pascal Petit and Alison Moore. And since its launch in 2008, we've awarded over £195,000 to our winners. And we've also, if you don't win, we hope that we can celebrate you by being on the shortlist. So in this event, we'll be hearing from all the shortlisted writers. You can read their work in full, all the poems and stories, on the competition website. And we'll also hear from the judges, who will be telling us what they found so exciting and moving about the work they finally selected. So for now, it's thank you to James Draper and everyone at the Writing School, to the judges, chaired by Malika Booker and Nicholas Royal, and to all of you writers who entered and were shortlisted. I'm so looking forward to hearing this work, and I'll see you later with the results.
This is the opening couple of paragraphs from Needle in a Haystack. Back in the day, there was this weird bookshop on an industrial estate next to a carpet shop and a mechanics. And though there were loads of signs on Harling Road, most people had no idea it was there. It started in one industrial unit, but the owner, Osborne, owned the land, so when the business expanded, he brought in shipping containers and filled them up with books. They were perfect for keeping out the rain and damp, and he just padlocked them at night. The shop was near the M56 and the airport, and there was an airport parking place just around the corner, but it was a rip-off. The manager, Lee, was a Wythenshawe lad through and through. He had a wispy beard and a greasy ponytail, and wore a leather fishing hat with a little city pin badge on. In winter he wore his walking gear, a green regatta fleece and Carrymore walking boots, and in autumn used that walking gear on camping trips to the Llyn Peninsula. Warren had gone to school with one of Osborne's sons from his second marriage, and had been working part-time in the shop as a favour for about 5 years. He'd been left a load of money and didn't really have to work, and spent most of the rest of his time cycling around Cheshire on a 3 grand road bike. Recycling Ray was in his 60s and had never been married. He wore silver-rimmed glasses, had grey hair, lived alone, and drove around in a rusting yellow Mercedes van. He always wanted to chat in the shop and could tell you directions to virtually anywhere in South Manchester. Minute detail. He did a lot of work for little financial return. He went to all sorts of places, charity shops, car boot sales. He was the kind of endearing geek that you still felt had someone out there for him. The trouble with Ray was that he never seemed to listen to what anybody said. There were a lot of people who came in that were a bit like that. They were on broadcast, not receive.
This is a reading of some short extracts from Hannah Donnellan's story Little, in which Tim is going to read the part of H and Nick is going to read the part of M. No, please go ahead.
Thank you.
Do you have the time?
Yeah, hold on. It's 3 p.m.
Thank you, dear.
Waiting for someone?
No, I don't think so.
Are you okay?
Yes.
It's okay if you're not. I was supposed to be meeting someone, but they've let me down.
Really?
Yeah, people are like that. Can't really ever trust anyone, can you?
I don't know. I think I can.
That's sweet. Why hasn't she told me about today? It wasn't a normal meeting. She's being deceitful. I decided to type to talk about my childhood. Not sure why, but offering her this part of me. I look at the words strung together, imagine them in the air, and a football coach fixing them as best he can, his weak, underfunded players, scrawny and desperate, arranging them. Still wouldn't be enough. Can't control them once they're out in the field. So, Marie, it's imperative you write back. Tell me your thoughts on all this. I need you. You see why I need you to always tell me the truth, Marie? Typing. She sends a picture, a flower, O'Keefe, and asks why I lied. She wants to ring me. She's ringing me. I put my phone on silent. The walls in this house are too thin. Do people not understand? And by people, I mean Marie. Marie, do you not understand? It's much easier to communicate if we take out the sound.
I brought you something.
Really?
It's a painting.
Wow. Thanks.
Some flowers.
Did you?
No, she's called Georgia O'Keeffe. Are you okay?
I'm great. Yeah.
What's your name?
I feel like my insides, Marie, they've been clawed out. Something really heavy has been dropped onto my heart and my breath. I can't. It feels like really thick fog, tarmac fog in my chest. Do you ever feel like that, Marie? Marie,
I think about you a lot.
you do.
You're very young and your hair is so bright. Meeting you, talking to you feels...
Feels what, Marie? I told you about my childhood, remember? And now you've betrayed me.
A bag of rags. A bit, he replied. A black Harley-Davidson boot, women's, with a metal-tipped spike heel. A blue cotton item. A copy of The Economist. A film flickered, highlighting his limbs and his hand wrapped around his cock. A full cup, surely, she would have said. A plastic box of poster paints containing 21 10p sized circles of colour which glisten as if wet from recent use. A right foot burgundy shoe. A roller coaster ride of them against the world, the result of which finds her in a room digging through the dusty items of a dead man. A shit smell. A tiny naked Carter clambered up a ladder in front of his chain-link version of Fragonard's The Swing, hung on the wall behind the tent, and perched on its top rung. A V-neck sweater is dusty, its left shoulder ravaged by moths. A violent Japanese porn film. After years of moving, she finally feels at home. Ah! Alex, come out, he said. Alex held off briefly and proceeded to eat the chocolate cheesecake. Alex inspects it. Alex presses a finger onto the white. Alex turns it over and inspects its sole. Alex turns the item around in her hand and pushes the tail section down through the tied ends. An Armani bag with fabric handles, an instruction manual for a table tennis table, an orange ping pong ball, an urge to pee.
Judging the competition was really hard. There was such a good variety and quality of entrants across the whole thing. It was really tough to get down to this amazing shortlist of 6 stories. I'm going to talk about 3 of them, and having done that, I'm going to hand over to Nick, who's going to talk about the other 3. We loved Andrea Mason's Dead Man's Stuff, especially Is No Good. It's a short story as kit form fragments, not yet assembled, perhaps the most formally innovative piece on the list. Reading Dead Man's Stuff, you're sifting through what seem to be the pieces of a story, now alphabetized and thus out of linear sequence. You're recognizing names and fragments as they come back that seem to come from perhaps the same scene or set of scenes, and yet all the time you're never quite sure that this is an actual story that's been disordered, or if it's a stack of story-like pieces from a whole that doesn't exist. Dead Man's Stuff is funny and it's compelling, and there's a beautiful gift in the way that the alphabetical arrangement of the lines disrupts narrative, but at the same time creates new narrative possibilities. We also loved Neil Campbell's Needle in a Haystack, which is short story as a kind of mythic, tangled pub anecdote with a super familiar voice that beckons us headfirst into a labyrinth of a second-hand bookshop on the road out near the airport and the motley crew of workers and customers that haunt it. Back in the day, there was this weird bookshop on an industrial estate next to a carpet shop and a mechanics. Needle in a Haystack maps a kind of lively, vivid and deep weirdness in the everyday of Manchester, with the kind of writing that can feel absolutely effortless. Energy of the twists and turns, the apparent digressions, the endless detail, the casual introduction of new figures, none of which, of course, is effortless at all. It makes for a beautifully controlled and focused story, putting one deft foot in front of another to take the reader exactly where the writer wants them to be. And we loved, finally, of these 3, Hannah Donnellan's Little, a short story as an uneasy, ambiguous SMS stream of consciousness, an interior laid out perfectly in an endless flow of short lines, setting out the narrator's deceptive communications with one person in a group chat. We loved the close one-to-one fit between the form and the content, the way that the super short sentences and thoughts, blunt, truncated, fragmentary, built piece by piece meticulously. And we loved its reminder that the short story can change how we think and our perception of our own thinking, taking us inside a voice, a mindset, as it makes a set of events unfold. Little felt alarmingly present, with its evocation of the possibilities for both intimacy and cruelty at a distance, and its articulation of the way that language and the technologies we use to communicate both reveal and shape us.
The epigraph to this poem is from the Medical Standard, 1895, and it reads, "When making lengthy explanations or reading continuously, they, the patients, drop into a meaningless, extravagant jabber, which Farrell most happily designates as word salad. Word salad. His words are shredded purple cabbage, punctuated with phrases of radicchio, subordinate to roasted butternut squash and Kalamata olives. His sentences are salty feta cheese, confabulated by croutons, structured like grated carrot and cucumber, undermined by garden rocket. His paragraphs are chopped bell peppers, sprinkled with almonds, manifested as pumpkin seeds in disguise, styled by red onions. His questions are 1 part balsamic vinegar, 2 parts olive oil. Answered by wilted iceberg and ripe heirloom tomatoes. His tears are sunflower seeds, roasted in tamari soy sauce, mixed with a twist of pink Himalayan rock salt. They fall like manuka honey.
Lithification. Under the hill, the earth is riddled with holes, little twisting passages and caverns, like bubbles of air in a loaf of well-leavened bread. Time down here runs slow and heavy, and if you stop paying attention, you might find that when you surface into the star-struck autumn night, you've left your body behind, lodged in a fissure, surrounded by the remains of the old seas, hard skeletons of coral, mollusks, brachiopods, the bodies of urchins and brittle stars, tiny watery algae that are still in the process of becoming undiscovered opals. This is what time will do to you, petrify your warm body into a fossil of calcium and plastic, your face becoming a frightened moon, your eyes compressing into 2 blue pearls, your heart and lungs disappearing, leaving no trace, leaving only your bones and the soles of your shoes and the shreds of your waterproof coat, to be excavated and strung up on wires, like a great whale in the middle of a well-lit hall. And still the cypress remains a tree of mourning. The trunk presses against your back, steady as a second spine. You hear what the tree hears, the sound of your mother calling, her voice frantic and fluttering like garden birds. The 100 arms of the cypress are flush around you, and their bitter green smell is a second skin that will never fully shed. When they come for the tree, you bind yourself to it with a pink skipping rope, write a crooked plaque of protest, save the trees. But you are small and easily uprooted, and chalk can be washed away with a hose. The chainsaw makes quick work of that steady trunk, and you feel the injustice of it in your bones, the sheer injustice of it, like a spear to the heart of a sleeping deer, and you think you might die from the weight of knowing that it cannot be undone, that grief has all the power of smoke against stone.
Rally at the Capitol, Bismarck, North Dakota, 2016. Camp bursts from buses, vans, opens like an agate on the state-sponsored lawn. Uniform and overmowed blades obscured now by the flash of jingle dresses. Jewel-toned, I stand with standing grok tees. Water is life signs float like sails. Let us believe our collective bodies could be a boat. Ricardo shares a sketch, a small girl placing a flower in the gaping throat of a gun. The ends of Red Fawn's ribbon skirt flutter like the cobalt butterflies back at camp, and everyone chants, protect the sacred, protect the sacred. We round dance, rise and fall like one set of lungs. Our skyward fists are a release of balloons, and none of this requires the rows of National Guard men swaddled in riot gear, matched in ill-fitting pants. I lay on the grass beside a huddle of quiet kids. RJ asks why there are so many cops, so many guns, when nobody has done anything violent. Hallie says they want us to start getting afraid. The monolith of men shadow us like the brutalist building they line up before, the obligatory blankness in their faces, blurring and disappearing, the bowed lips, birthmarks, moles, the small asymmetries their lovers must think of at night.
It's a pleasure to talk to you about these winning poems. The first poem is "The Story Starts Like This" with Scraps of Shell. This poem is by Teresa Zieglerich. These original poems diligently attempt to capture an expansive intergenerational history. These are fresh and affecting poems, a sequence of protest poems, and yet there's a real sense here of a poet's skill in transforming difficult material into poetry, which, whilst retaining its polemic force, at the same time is persuasive in its lyrical detail and varied in its approach to form. These are lyrical poems steeped in resistance and protest. A poem made up of long-lined couplets sits alongside a poem of more notish quality, such as A Lesson in Word Choice, where fragments, dialogue, and testimony are gathered into powerful effect. Admissions by Carol Ann Duffy. This sequence of poems is a very sensitive portrayal of a young man with mental illness from a parent's point of view. What the judges were very taken with was the brave notes of irony and humour. The poems are all the more moving as the poet resists a sentimental or emotional plea. Instead, the poet captures the complexity and anguish as bystander, and these strands of experience are rendered into these painfully accurate poems. The poet also uses gapping devices and disjunction in the poems to wonderful effect. And Still the Cypress Remains a Tree of Mourning by Hannah Cooper Smithson. The judges marvelled at both the music and the natural light-footedness in these poems, as well as the poet's ability to travel seamlessly from the natural world and the personal and the body itself. Elegiac, evocative, and careful, long-lined poems flowing with beautiful images that build stroke by stroke, much like a painting, to explore personal loss as well as that of the landscape. The judges also admired how each poem arrived at its ending with such graceful ease.
Bright side. A year after her husband died, the council erected a street lamp on the cul-de-sac directly outside Sib's house. Was the world too dark? No, certainly not in the suburbs of an English Midlands town. The street lamp was at the exact height of her bedroom window, and it blasted a noisy orange light over the back wall and the dressing table and the bookshelf and the bed. Especially the bed. It made her feel like she was living inside a throat lozenge. 52 years old, and for the first time in her life, she couldn't sleep. She hung a sheet of blackout paper. As it was August, she needed the window open, but the breeze flapped the blackout, so the light flared intermittently, which was worse. After 2 weeks without sleep, she was in bits. Fatigue, forgetfulness, professional mistakes. Sib worked for the customer services department of a white goods company. David, her late husband, had taught people to drive. She began to hallucinate at home. As she drank her morning coffee, the articulated lamp in her peripheral vision briefly became a shoebill stork, a massive, ugly African water bird she'd seen on Attenborough. It had an oversized beak like a giant clog, and an extra pair of eyelids, slick, milky membranes. At night, Sib longed for additional eyelids, preferably made of lead, but all she had were these two useless flaps of skin. It was unfair to call shoebills ugly. To other shoebills, they may have been beautiful. Not all of them, of course, but out there somewhere was the Clooney of shoebills, the Beyoncé of shoebills. Every shoebill had a mate.
Ian Dudley, exit row. You tick the box that says here for business, but it makes no difference. There's sand on the floor of the hotel lift. Two women in bathing suits chat across you. You want to get to bed so you can put in a full 8 hours of lying awake. When you give up and come down, you're the only zombie in the restaurant. You drink whiskey sours and eat French fries and bronzed red snapper. You say you won't care if you never come here again. It's a nightmare theme park of strip malls, clip joints and churches, archipelagos of houses with moorings, box fresh golf courses and instant villages. You're still burning bridges when the ghost in your phone trills a hurricane warning. You know it's time to leave when it starts raining in your room. We apologise for the delay to this flight. You're spat into a plaza of antiseptic light to suffer and be unforgiven. Hours dead, parents hang by their necks. Their children reel like headless chickens. The gutters of hell run with boredom. There's no time to do anything. When the tannoy jerks you to life, you line up in the dusk along the airside window. Mirrored in fluorescent light, you and your shade queue for the flight. You see a glass falling in slow motion, splintering into 1,000 pieces. It's so slow, it takes days.
For the man who died in the wood. Learn to make marks using hammers. The sentence runs through a thin paper photocard displayed in a fridge. Not the one where the body was taken. It's a tall silver economy fridge belonging to the mother of the little boy who learnt to make many marks with his friends in the wood. The woman can't see the memory as a fluorescent yellow border around the words makes the letters go pop. Tree falls, man falls, and after the storm they never went back. The mother wonders about the dog who waited by the man's side. The gates on all four corners of the wood stay locked, and the entrance pathways become overgrown. Nature flourished and perished. Habitats for birds undisturbed. A call to a wood dug up for their own kind, and the squirrels and the things that fall beneath. The singing became louder as the days blurred. Winter turned to spring. Passers-by trailed the streets around the perimeters of the wood, pressing their ears to the cold black railings which lined its borders. Some half inclined to jump over to hear more, but they daren't. Food scarce. Nothing dropped, littered or left, even out of kindness. Woody warning signs on all entry points forbidding any human, good, bad or in between, to come in. Someone from the government holds the key and comes by once or twice to check for danger. Again, leaves.
Edward Hogan's Bright Side is a story about a woman who can't sleep because of the bright street lamp that's been installed outside her bedroom window. She hallucinates a shoebill stalk out of an anglepoise lamp. She has bad dreams. She's signed off from work. She's reminded constantly of her late husband, because that's the thing. Slipped in right at the start of the story, just before we hear about the new street lamp, is the real reason for her insomnia. A year earlier she lost her husband. It's a beautiful, powerful story about bereavement. For a heavy subject, it has a light touch. It's one of those stories I somehow feel I've read before, even though I know I haven't, but in a good way, as if it's always been somehow inside me, waiting for Edward Hogan to come along and get it out. If you've ever been awake in the middle of the night when you should have been asleep, if you've ever lost someone dear to you, this story will be strangely, almost comfortingly familiar. The experience of reading Ian Dudley's Exit Row is a bit like watching Chris Marker's 1962 film La Jetée, which was made entirely out of still frames and voiceover. In the case of La Jetée, you feel as if you've been watching a film. In fact, the effect takes hold even while you're watching it. And why wouldn't it? What is a film anyway but a series of still frames, giving the illusion of movement? Similarly, Exit Row is a series of stills that, even as they accumulate, imply, suggest, insinuate a story. Insinuate is too strong, implying a degree of urgency that is replaced here by something completely alienated, some feeling of detachment. It's a story that works like an incoming tide. With each wave that washes on the shore, it deposits a little more in your mind. By the time you've read the whole story and put it aside and some time has gone by, it's like the tide has gone out again, leaving treasure dotted on the foreshore, but also a sense that it will happen all over again next time you read it, next time the tide comes in. Which is a fancy way of saying that this is a story that keeps on giving, that never quite exhausts its material. In a strange way, it's endless. The day before I read Bernadette McBride's For the Man Who Died in the Wood for the first time, I got lost, briefly, in a wood. Reading this story, I felt I was back in the wood and lost all over again, but just as being actually lost in the real wood had been exhilarating, so too is the experience of reading this story and allowing yourself to get lost in it. We've heard the one about the tree that falls in the forest. This is the one about the tree that falls in the wood, and then the man that falls in the wood, and then narrative blows through the undergrowth of language in a virtuoso display of personified imaginative writing.
It may be a story about death, but it's also a story about rebirth. As with Exit Row, there may be things you won't get, or not this time, but maybe next time, and you'll glimpse a little more each time, just like every time you go in the wood, you get to know it a little better. But it's always a wood, and you'll always get lost, at least a little bit.
I'm Joan Michelson, and I'm going to read the opening poem from Time and Again. The poems take us through anniversaries of a death up until the 20th year. The Lost Week. On the last Sunday, in the lost photo, which our daughter took with the camera we'd given her the week before, we're on the sofa, reading in a mess of mismatched pillows. You're wearing your bent specs. This I notice, and how we sit, resting back, slumped but leaning so our shoulders touch. My right leg, in plaster from a fall I took while jogging, is stretched to the piano bench. Your feet, in sheepskin slippers, rest high against the chimney breast. To help your heart, I think, keep it secret until Friday, when the 213 pulls out without you.
Microphone. A good listener, with a heart-shaped zone of sensitivity to vibrations in the very air, your fine microphone amplifies the small imagination's vibrato in the diaphragm to flower in the speaker with pure vocal grace. Only technicians know what phantom power helps it fill the ear with such deep space. Scale. To bear what it has to. That is the craft. Also, to measure the force by which the world brings one down. Imagine if it laughed every time its inward dial got whirled, bearing the unbearable, which describes how it does justice. It's a bit uncouth. It lends you gravitas precisely when your scribe's heart is weighed against the plume of truth. Screw. Spiral staircase, or ramp rather, as in a tiny parking garage, or the chutes of the runner bean. Such things as spin a helix, one of nature's absolutes, into the matrix of the universe. Turn the self-locking vortex by the head with your torquing driver. Such tight verse holds all things together by a thread.
Night Song. Birds came in on the tail of the day to the evening bells of Harper hay. Dusk had smudged the land, the lanes long as sorrow in the graceless rain. He'll remember the hour, the saddening glamour of lamps in the dark, the way the city lit its quiet lights below the stars. And this is home, old as coal, as cotton, old as the throat that a boy broke open there at evensong. Yes, Manchester, the little lights lived on. He knew the prayers, the silver songs that lit the sky by night. How time would remember this city, the thousand lost tomorrows and the avenues of light And oh, the human music, the ever-bells, the pipes that lifted through the smoke, there held their holy notes. And those bright gods, over the domes of the dark, he watched the sparrows charm and sparkle into absence, into loss.
It's my pleasure to talk about 3 of our finalists' poetry portfolios on behalf of the judging panel. Night Song and Other Poems by Laura Potts. These are poems of place and praise, elegiac lyrics in which the poet's eye and mind travel through the landscape, from birds to the tops of chimneys to a lost child, never letting the notes of the song slip. It was above all the musicality of Laura's poetry that struck us, the haunting vowel music and waterfall of medial rhymes in poems that are suffused with the ever-glow of home, that vibrate with the poet's love for Manchester and Yorkshire and are unabashedly lyrical and tender. Time and Again by Joan Michelson. This is a sequence that covers a long time span and tells with extraordinary economy the story of a marriage and the sudden loss of a husband, a father. These are elegies in which dying has no ending, where time is suspended and the narrative melds the present and the past by seamlessly superimposing one on the other. We admired the clarity and restraint of this exacting sequence, the candid portraits capturing limbo states of grief, terse with expectation, and the controlled handling of the narrative, both suspenseful and elegant. Lighter and Other Poems, James Pollock. We loved this sequence of formal 8-line poems, each on a small object, such as a lighter, a screw, a sewing needle, etc., and each poem a metaphor for poetry itself, an exquisite piece of machinery, mirroring its subject, every cog and wheel oiled and finely dovetailed. The technical mastery, microscopically close observation, and aphoristic reflections combine to produce miniatures that create large echoic spaces for the mind and imagination to expand in. The skills and accomplishment displayed by this poet were simply marvellous, and we'd love to see this sequence developed into a book-length collection.
I'm going to talk a little bit about what winning the Manchester Fiction Prize in 2019 meant for me. I think, in one sense it was a great, obviously a validation of the work, that it could be looked at blind alongside, so many other stories and be sort of pulled out to be on the shortlist. That felt already like something, really amazing and great. I was also really glad of the opportunity that being on the shortlist and winning gave me to sort of bring the work in front of different people, different readers, different audience, if you like. I think it really helped raise awareness of what I'm doing. And obviously on a financial level, it's a fantastic prize. And it really enabled me, the money from that, to take time out from other activity in order to focus on writing. And that was an amazing sort of gift that the prize gave to me. And it has meant that I've sort of managed to develop a whole bunch of other stories and the direction of work that came from the one that I put into the competition.
Hello, my name is Malaika Booker, and I'm the chair of judges for this year's Manchester Poetry Prize. The competition took place under the most extraordinary circumstances. We were undergoing a global pandemic. People were restricted to their homes, and all over the world we've seen unbelievable scenes, from Black Lives Matter to bushfires, political, environmental, and social challenges, and unrest around issues of gender, race, and basic human rights. We've also seen Brexit agreements and the UK leaving the Union. I was fortunate to work with two poets that I admire and value. Mona Arshy, who is able to dissect the anatomy of a poem with a delicacy and diligence. And Mimi Kavati, with her invaluable encyclopedic knowledge of poetry and the ability to diagnose the DNA and life force of a poem, who is so well read and holds a reservoir of world poetry knowledge. They were both invaluable. The judging was like a poetic dialogue with old friends. It felt valuable to spend a day on a Zoom call, discussing, debating, sharing our views and poetry over tea and biscuits. It felt a necessary intimacy during these times of isolation. The poems that arrived reflected the grief, hope, and mirrored what we were experiencing in the world. We chose poems that we were haunted by, poems that were pushing against forms, poems that sung, poems that indicated a dexterity and ease with formal and technical restraints. Poems trying to find a language to articulate trauma or difficult social and medical circumstances. We chose poems that hurt and praise. Accomplished poems, formal skills, poems that manage narration or narrative, sophisticated, grappling with difficult subjects. Poems where the musicality compelled us to read lines out aloud, salivating and celebrating the vivid imagery. Poems that constructed the world with lyrical dexterity. Poems lush and full of praise. Thank you to all who surrendered their poems to these processes, to the competition, and the shortlisted poets who provided Mona, Mimi, and myself with a heartfelt variety of poems to savor and discuss and validate our love of poetry as the language and literary art form necessary to humans' existence. Thank you.
Normally, the way I prepare this summing up, or as I might have said last year, the way I write this speech, is I find the text of last year's speech on my computer, open the file, do a quick save as, go through and change the names of the judges, maybe change what I said about the shortlisted stories, change what I said about the competition entries in general, and Bob's your uncle, new speech written. Well, maybe not quite, but you know what I mean. When I look at the speech I wrote for last year's prize giving, which took place in a room with people, it reads like historical fiction. Everything has changed, and yet, somehow, at the same time, everything, or some things, have remained the same, such as the sense we had as judges of what a privilege it is to read so many stories that offer so many different glimpses and insights into so many lives from all over the world. It's true that this year there were more stories about isolation and about caring for others who are either older or less able to care for themselves. But what this year's entries have in common with last year's and those of all previous years is the sheer variety of voices. There's no sifting panel. Between the judges, 3 of us this year, we read all the stories that were entered. There's something exciting about the first stage of judging, when you're reading stories the other judges have not seen and you're looking for stories to recommend to them, which you hope might make the shortlist. And there's something exciting about that later stage too, when we each read the stories the other judges have found and then we talk about them for hours. It's not easy deciding which stories will make it onto the shortlist, and it's not easy deciding which story will win. Indeed, it wasn't easy this time. We did reach a unanimous decision, but all 6 shortlisted stories were potential winners. It is a great achievement to have made the shortlist. I'd like to thank James for his unflappable management and my fellow judges Irenison Okoji and Tim Etchells for their hard work and enormous generosity. Irenison was very sorry that personal circumstances meant she was unable to contribute directly to these recorded announcements.
And now it's time to announce the winners of the 2020 Manchester Writing Competition. And the winner of the £10,000 Manchester Fiction Prize is Ian Dudley, and the winner of the £10,000 Manchester Poetry Prize is James Pollock. So those are our winners, and many, many congratulations to both Ian and James, and indeed to all of the writers of this year's shortlist. And do go to the competition website where you can read their work in full. And we're so disappointed not to do this in real life, but thank you all so much for being here digitally. And we really hope that our 2021 writing prizes will be awash with champagne and with hugs. Thank you all. Stay safe.